Yeah, so the best way I can describe traction is that there are some businesses out there where the leaders of the business are getting everything they want to get out of the business. They're happy with revenue, they're happy with profitability, they're happy with growth. But they also have work-life balance because they're spending their time doing the things they love to do, the stuff that really adds value to the business. They're not just putting out fires. Their workers are fully engaged. They're getting things done in processes and systems that work with minimal noise, minimal waste of effort. They're creating a product or service that their customers love. So that's what we describe as a great business. And it's 3 to 5% of all the businesses out there. The other 95% are varying degrees of not that, but trying to become that. And EOS, the best way I can describe it, is it is a complete system of simple tools that are designed to help a company make the journey from wherever they are to becoming a great business.
Welcome back to the Prospecting Show. Today is June 11th, and we have Michael Halperin on the call. How are you?
Good, Connor. How you doing?
I am doing fantastic. So the format, everybody knows that with the Prospecting Show here, we have really three parts to the show. We have the past, the current, and the future. So to kind of introduce yourself, maybe give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you do, and then we'll talk a little bit about your story.
Okay, so the short story is I help people implement something called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. And I do this in Pittsburgh. So most of the clients I work with are in southwestern or central Pennsylvania. The longer answer for how I got here is that I really grew up in the IT industry, kind of worked my way up and ultimately became the chief technology officer of an IT services company. But all along, I had that tug in my heart that I kind of knew I needed to be an entrepreneur. And one day I just sort of came to the conclusion that I had become a lousy employee. So I jumped off the cliff and founded my company, Freebridge, in January of 2009, right in the midst of the Great Recession. I did it without having really a detailed plan. I just kind of figured I'd be doing some coaching and consulting and started getting traction in the IT services industry because that's what I know. And about a year in, kind of a funny story, I accidentally co-founded a mergers and acquisitions company. So did that for about a year and a half, and one of my consulting clients recruited me to do a turnaround of their IT services practice, and a turnaround of a business is something I had always wanted to do. So I did that for a couple of years, and we got it to where we wanted to be, rode off into the sunset, took a step back and said, well, I know how to buy these companies. I know how to run one. So let's buy one and run it. So I did that and did it with other people's money. I had a couple PE companies back me, and it was a really fast run. We grew that company by 300% in less than 3 years. We went from less than 20 employees to over 75, which was frankly pretty overwhelming. You know how they say that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint? It felt like sprinting a marathon. So a friend of mine introduced me to the book Traction by Gino Wickman, which is the book that introduced the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS, to the world. And I implemented EOS at my company, Apogee IT Services. And for us, it just had a game-changing impact on our alignment, our focus, our traction. And after about 3 years at the helm of Apogee, we kind of got to the point where I just couldn't sprint that marathon anymore. And we all agreed it was time to transition out. I took that step back for what I wanted to do next, and realized I just had a passion for the COS, and it's just a fantastic way of helping other companies be successful. So I became an EOS implementer. And today I'm working with 18 companies, helping them to get where they want to go. And I'm having a huge impact and more fun than I've ever had working.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think are very interesting is a lot of people read books and don't actually implement, right? And that's not to say that just Traction is just a read and implement kind of book. It's a lot more than that, but there's a lot of 4-Hour Work Week and Traction, and there's a bunch of other books out there, self-help driven books that kind of give you some steps and guidance on how to do it. But the interesting thing, I think, in my experience with EOS, is Gino Wickman has put together, this implementer program and experts like yourself to actually deploy these skill sets into the business. So what made you want to kind of go from reading the book to actually becoming an implementer and then, doing that service?
Primarily, it was really the experience that I had. When I made the decision to implement EOS, I was introduced to an implementer who was part of the community that Gino founded called EOS Worldwide, and I worked with him. And the experience that he had, having read the book, and I'm a pretty smart guy, and I can generally figure things out for myself, but I thought we might go a little bit faster working with somebody who'd done it before, and it was just a great decision. The subtlety of it and some of the things that are beneath the surface are a lot more than I probably thought after just reading the book. But the other piece about it that my implementer Ed Callahan did for us was he held us accountable. There's a little bit of an aspect of you reading the book and you're kind of moving along going, well, we think we're doing it right, but you don't necessarily have the confidence. And you get to that table because, like every other leadership team on the face of the earth, there's issues. We're imperfect humans, and we're an imperfect team. And there are certain things that we don't necessarily want to deal with. And he forced us to deal with those things. And he forced us to hold ourselves accountable and actually execute and build the habits that you need to build in order for EOS to be successful. So, in my mind, I think there's tremendous value that the implementer added for us. And I wanted to do the same thing for other companies that want to make that trip.
Yeah, and with the companies that you're working with right now, these local ones that you have, what would you say the common thread is? Like, what is the one piece? And I know EOS is very diverse, but like, what is the one piece in the business that you see time and time again that people just aren't getting right? And that's ultimately one of the causes that leads to all these other problems.
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think through the common threads because there are a lot of different scenarios. I've got teams that are everywhere from they're just stuck, they've hit the ceiling, they can't move forward, and they don't know how to get unstuck, to companies that are just going gangbusters, but looking in the horizon and saying, this great run is not going to run forever. At some point, we're going to need to do something different to continue the growth that we're on. I guess if there's a common thread, it's either they're at a point or they can foresee a point where, as they say, what got us here will not get us there. We're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to do something different if we want to get out of this business what we really want to get out of this business, whether that's growth or profitability or valuation or just work-life balance. They're looking for something that they can implement for the long term that's going to enable them to continue to evolve that business over time.
And with looking at, revenues in these companies, because I'm sure some of them are small and some of them are large, I've heard, and this is, true of a couple companies that I own and other companies that we've worked with, really that $1 to $5 million transition seems to be, from a revenue standpoint, seems to be where a lot of difficulty occurs. Sub 1 million, it's kind of controlled and organized. Once you get, maybe 5 to 10 million over, you have enough systems and people in place to make it work. But that 1 to 5 in the middle is kind of this standing point where people aren't really sure, do we grow? Do we have a lifestyle business? Do we have a scalable business? Do we have the right people? Like, do you find that kind of revenue range is where people start getting stuck?
So the smallest companies that I'm working with are right around $1 million, and the largest one I'm working with is, I think, about $150 million. Implementers in our community have worked with public companies up to $1 billion. So there really isn't any top stop. It really comes down to, is the leadership team capable of making decisions and implementing those decisions without permission from the board of directors or a parent corporation, those kinds of things. So it really runs a very broad gamut. But you raise an interesting point, and that's the idea of the inflection points. And I worked for a company one time that hit $10 million and got stuck. I've seen other companies at 25 million get stuck. The company where I was chief technology officer hit about 100 million and got stuck. So there are these inflection points where what you've done just won't get you there any further. There was a book in the 60s written by, I think it was Larry Greiner was his name, wrote a book called The Evolution and Revolution of Business, and scientifically proved that businesses are always hitting these inflection points. In the evolution stage of a business is yesterday's an offshoot of today and tomorrow's an offshoot of today. Tomorrow's an offshoot of today, but when you hit that wall, you can't evolve your way out of it. You've got to do something dramatically different to get over that hump. And then you can go back into another evolutionary phase, at which point, of course, you're going to get stuck again. And that's just a cycle that continues. That's how every business grows. And when you get stuck, You either got to figure out a way to break through that ceiling, or you're going to flatline, or you're going to fail.
And when you come into these businesses and you start, like what is the length of time you spend with them to actually, start making changes? Because I know in the book they talk about a ton of different techniques, but one of the things that's always interested me is like, how long does this take to fix?
So the initial startup phase with EOS is 3 full-day sessions that happen over a period of 60 days. And in that period of time, what I'm doing is I'm teaching them the tools that they need to execute. And concurrently with that, we're building out their vision. And we stretch out that vision over the 60 days just because that's typically how long it takes them to master those foundational tools. So what ends up happening is at the end of that 60-day period, the two things align. They've got a vision, they're aligned around the vision, they're excited about the vision. As I like to say, no light between their shoulders across the leadership team. They believe it, they want it, and that's the time when they actually have the muscles to move forward and go. And they just get out of the gate and run. And from that point forward, what I do is I go through this cycle of quarterly and annual meetings, 3 quarterlies, one annual over the course of a year. And we just continue to refine things, identify the issues they need to resolve, prioritize things, get things done. And I'm facilitating those and coaching them. And then usually from the time I start working with a company until we get to about their second annual, so it's roughly in the neighborhood of 2 years, that's the point at which it just kind of all clicks in for them. And they're like, yeah, we got this now. We've built the habits. We know the tools. We're in a good rhythm. We got the right people in the right seats across the leadership team, and they're ready to fly on their own. And that's the point at which I typically back out. So it's usually about 2 years. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little bit more, but that's a typical journey.
And do you find that some of these companies, as they start scaling back up to a different number, they have acquisitions or mergers that happen, that you come back in a second time and work with the same company? Have you ever had that happen?
There's one I'm doing that with right now where they had a lot of change in the organization, and they've brought me back in to kind of help them reboot. They kind of broke down some of their habits and they wanted to rebuild the discipline. So I'm working with them for a little while. But that does happen. There's a lot of cases where we get to that 2 year point and they'll say, you know what, once a quarter would like you to come in and just do one session with us. Or they'll say, we're going to do all our quarterlies, but we still want you to do our annual, just to kind of keep that accountability, that discipline, and that confidence that they're still doing it the right way, because that confidence is critically important. And that's one of the things that companies that try to do this without an implementer kind of miss is you're tentative. Well, I think this is right. But when you know that it's right, when you got somebody saying, yes, that's the way it's supposed to be, you're just going to move faster. So whatever journey it is you're trying to take with your business, whatever you're trying to get out of it, you're going to get there faster if you've got the confidence that you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, and also with organizations that are really small and there's a small number of employees on the team, the weight or the workload is probably pretty heavy for these people when they're still doing their day job and all the work that they have in place. But now they're going to go take EOS strategies and try to change it, right? That mindset and that pivot is probably a greater impact with smaller companies because there's less people to take on the workload, right?
Yeah, you can have a lot of impact because what it does, it allows them to narrow the focus. One of the things about EOS is we're about, yes, there's this list of 60 things you could be doing, but you can't do 60 things. So let's pick the 6 or the 7 really critically important ones that we want to focus on for the next 90 days. Let's put the other ones on a longer term issues, and let's just get done what we need to get done. And it definitely has a big impact on the smaller organizations, but that principle applies to pretty much everybody we work with.
And from a success standpoint, what would you say to date the most successful kind of story is that you could share with us, where a business was having some difficulty either in scaling or finances or organizational structure or anything that the US system can help with? They were failing in some part of their business. You came in and then helped them later. Like, could you share some of those pieces?
There's one in particular I was working with that we sat down for one of our sessions and they said, we're not sure we're going to be here for the next quarterly meeting. They had been just financial issues, cash flow issues for a really long time, and they were afraid they were going to have to close the doors. So we in that session got together and we spent about an hour and a half just going, okay, what's the gap? And where's that gap coming from? And what are some things that we need to do in order to close that financial gap? And they had to make some really hard decisions, but they decided what they needed to do. They committed themselves to executing on it. And 2 months later, they had their first cash flow positive month in years. And then the COVID situation hit and the lockdown, and they were pretty much out of business for a few months. And in May, they had their second cash flow positive month. So that's one that I'm really proud of, that the work that we did and the work that they did and the commitment they made to doing and executing some pretty hard things to get there. But the other thing that has just permeated over the last 2 months is the number of clients that I've spoken with who have told me, my God, we are so fortunate that we decided to implement this, when we did, so that when this COVID situation hit, we had an arena where we could have the conversations. We had the open, honest culture within our leadership team to talk about the hard things we needed to. We knew how to prioritize. We knew how to execute. And I have one client who told me this COVID situation had happened in 2019 when it did. We're not sure how we would have survived as a business. But where we are right now is we feel like we are completely prepared to thrive as a business. And I've got a number of different companies that said, rather than running around with our hair on fire, we simply say this is a great opportunity for us to take advantage of the downtime and just execute on a whole bunch of stuff that we knew we were going to get to at some point and position our business to operate better. And I've got a number that feel like they're just in great shape coming out of the gate compared to their competitors.
Yeah. And I think the really tough thing with COVID is you take a lot of these large businesses, they're probably going to be okay. Yeah, there's some furloughing, maybe some bankruptcy on some of the huge corporations on the retail side. But you look at the small businesses, right? And that's the ones that are really going to get crushed by all this. Probably towards September, October, we're going to see what the economics of the country look like. Mostly because there's going to be some time for people to actually get back to their business and see if it can, come back or not. Where do you see things going over the next 3 to 6 months? And then where do you see things going over the next 5 years post COVID?
So I think over the next 3 to 6 months, it's going to be interesting. And I think the one thing that everybody knows is going to be the big issue is there a second wave? Because if we have to go back into another lockdown, I think that's really going to be tough. I will tell you that in the great companies that I'm working with, every single company, I don't know there's been a better piece of legislation passed in American history than that PPP loan program. It saved hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of businesses are still around because of that. So that was tremendous. So hopefully we don't have to go back and do something else like that. But those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing out there. I do believe that there are massive changes in the landscape of business. And I actually wrote a blog about this I posted up on my website. And it's about the idea that when there is a flood, a major flood, the landscape completely changes. And whether you're a winner or whether you're a loser has something to do with the landscape itself, but a lot of it has to do with how you perceive that landscape and how you adjust to what the changes are. I've been spending a lot of time with my companies that are, really focused on the here and now and say, can we take a step back and think about what this is doing? Well, how is it changing your customers' attitudes? How is it changing your competitors? How is it changing market expectations? Are there adjacent markets that you couldn't get to before that you can now? What's changing out there in the landscape that you either need to prepare for that could bite you if it's not good, or that you could take advantage of out there? And they've come up with some pretty creative things in companies that are, thought they were just hunkering down trying to hang on to their people, suddenly realizing, wait a minute, we have a heck of a time trying to find really good people, and there's a whole bunch out there that are unemployed. Can we go out and find people? And is there a way we can scrape together our pennies and actually bring people on board that are available now that we haven't been able to find for the last 3, 4, 5 years? So I think looking at those opportunities is one of the things that's out there for companies. It's not just all bad stuff. Every time that there's an economic downturn, there are some companies that come out much, much stronger than they went in, and a lot of companies that come out a lot weaker. So, I'm proud of the fact that most of the companies I'm working with seem to be the ones that are going to come out stronger. As I look into the longer term, at least, for me, I think the big change that I've had is, I always did my sessions with my leadership teams face to face, and obviously I couldn't do that anymore. So I started doing remote sessions, which I'd never done before, and they've actually gone way better than I thought they would, to the point where now I'm starting to think about, if I come across somebody who's really interested in EOS, who isn't in Pittsburgh, I could do an entire relationship with them, help them through the process, and do it all remotely, which is something that 3 months ago I probably never would have thought of doing.
Well, and that's the adaptability factor, right? And to kind of go back to what you're saying before, about, buying talent or buying people for the organization, right? Hiring the right people and putting them in place. I think the very critical piece right now is there's a whole recruitment industry, right? Headhunting, talent acquisition, recruitment, HR that has always been, for the last, I don't know, 3-4 years when unemployment's been at 3%, it's been very difficult to convince someone from a nice job to kind of take this new position that they have offered. But now that that has changed substantially, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and there's some great recruiting people that have talent or represent talent or have other people in their pipeline that don't have a job now, not necessarily because they were bad at what they did, but because the way just everything got restructured. There's a lot of people in the marketplace now with specific skill sets that are looking to get back into the workforce. And it's kind of a win for them because they could become employed, but it's also a win for the business because just like everything else, there's a discount on labor, time, money, effort, and pretty much every asset that exists out there. So it'll be very interesting over the next, 3 to 9 months to see the employment rates or the unemployment rates rather, and then also the type of talent in the transition from one company to a next. I think you're going to see some companies that restructure departments, restructure talent, and kind of go in a different direction. And at the same time, people or employees in those companies that consider other alternatives, maybe a remote working environment as opposed to in office. Maybe they have some kind of other benefit that doesn't require a commute. Maybe they stay away from the big cities. I think people have realized now that it's not all it used to be, driving downtown New York or living in New York. I think people are going to really change the way they do things. So just to your point, remote sessions, Zoom, online, lower cost of labor. And I think the benefits packages around a lot of these people who work in corporations are going to change. And I think people like yourself that are on the outside consulting inwards, there's going to be a much bigger need for people like you because an organization is going to realize, hey, I don't have to spend $200,000 a year for 3 HR kind of directive people. I can have an implementer, whether it's EOS or some other system or just some kind of consultant come from the outside and restructure and kind of fix a company without having to have someone on payroll that's their full-time job.
I think that people have really had their eyes open around a number of things. I know that there's a lot of people who just had this feeling like, I need my people in the office every single day. And then it just became impossible for 3 months. It's like, well, how am I going to make sure they're still working? And lo and behold, they are. And now they're like, you know what, maybe this works a little bit better. And now they're thinking, just like you said, well, I'm no longer looking for people just in my own market. I might be able to find people who are 100% remote. And now all of a sudden, the entire United States and beyond becomes part of the pool that I can start recruiting from. I know that when I was running the IT services business, finding people who could do what we needed to do with the right cultural alignment, it was extremely difficult. And I've seen that when I go out and talk to businesses that are interested in EOS and I ask them the question, what are your biggest challenges? People is always one of the top 3, and it's usually around finding people, especially when it's skilled people that they're looking for. And I think this has the potential to really shake things up in some really good ways for business, and ultimately, I think in good ways for the workers as well.
Well, the cost benefits, unbelievable. I was just speaking to a guy in my community here in Pittsburgh that is been full-time sales for the last 2 years for a San Francisco company. They pay San Francisco salaries, but he lives in Pittsburgh. And so it was kind of an interesting thing that got my brain thinking, like there's the East Coast New Yorks, there's the West Coast California, big giant companies that are headquartered there, used to cost of living being extremely high. But now they're picking talent that are in lower cost areas like Pittsburgh or maybe parts of Michigan or some of these other states that the cost of living is lower, but the talent pool is and could be just as good. So I think these companies will have lower payroll, get the same result, if not better. And like you're saying, they're getting more globalization. Who knows? Maybe you get somebody from Hong Kong or something to work on your team because you realize I really don't need him to be in the US. It's just not necessary at all.
Absolutely. And it's also occurred to me that there could actually be some communities, forward-thinking communities that actually position themselves as telecommuting centers. So I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh. And weather aside, Erie has a very nice standard of living. It's inexpensive. Everything is accessible. There's a lot more cool things going on in Erie than probably a lot of people would think. And it's always occurred to me that, if you could do just like you said, you get somebody who's in San Francisco earning a San Francisco salary, telecommuting from a place like Erie, that could be a really good place for people to be. And if a community like that started thinking of themselves as a telecommuting hub and putting in the right infrastructure to attract people and support that, it could really be a boon for the community too.
Yeah. And what would you say your biggest piece of advice is going forward now, right? You've had this experience in the past, you've been doing these implementations, you've seen everything that's happened with COVID, you've kind of given us your thoughts on what's going to happen in the future. What's the piece of advice that you could give people right now, small, mid-sized business owners, people who are trying to get out of this whole COVID thing? What's the piece of advice you could give them going forward?
I think it's to think forward. I think it's to not get suckered into the bunker mentality. No question about it. There's some businesses that have actually done better because of COVID, has actually helped them. There's a lot that have just been absolutely cratered because of this. But for everybody who's kind of in between there, that maybe is thinking in a defensive posture, don't forget about playing offense. Don't think about what could we do to structure ourselves and position ourselves and get ourselves aligned and really get ourselves in a position where we can execute and outrun everybody else. Because as this opens up, it's going to be, nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody's going to be, all we know is it's going to be different. So is different going to be better or is different going to be worse? Probably has less to do with where you land than it has to do with how you understand, assess, plan, and adjust your plan for what your opportunity is to move your business forward.
100% agree. So to wrap things up here on the prospecting show, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, talk about EOS, talk about some implementation, meet you virtually, whatever it is, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
The best way for anybody to reach me is by my email, which is michael@freebridgeinc.com. They can also go to my website, which is www.freebridgeinc.com. And just to make sure we're clear, that's free with an F, FREEBRIDGEINC.com. And there's a contact page there that goes right to my email. And anybody who's interested in this idea about the opportunities, there's a blog up there. What can a sunken steamship tell us about the reopening economy? That it's a quick read, but talks really very much about this idea of where businesses go from here has a lot more to do with the businesses than it has to do with the outside environment.
Awesome. Well, for anybody who's listening on the show, if you're looking for some EOS or just some implementation guidance, reach out to Michael. You have the contact details there. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for showing your wisdom and kind of what you think the future is going to bring. It'll be interesting to see how the world changes over the next 6 months or so. But I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show and have an awesome day.
Thanks for having me, Connor. I really enjoyed it.